Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Colleagues, welcome to our webinar, which is of interest to many, and the talk of the day. Particularly, I'm privileged to really welcome our panelists from different parts of the world. Thank you very much for being available to us. This is a global webinar, an issue focusing on Africa, but could be also very relevant for smallholder farming systems in South Asia and Latin America. The panelists who have been working in Africa for years are really keen to share with us on the agenda and our really interest is to open it up for a debate, because as you know, there are so many competing narratives in the world on how to sustain production and productivity in Africa. So we really thought this is an opportunity for us to agree on the major agendas and the way forward. And this session is going to be facilitated by AGRA's Vice President, Ms. Agi Konde. Agi, the floor is yours, and thank you again for being available in this seminar with a very short notice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Telahun, and allow me to welcome all of us who are on the call already. I can see already 130 people and counting. You're welcome wherever you're joining us from. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon. And we now live in a truly global village, and COVID with its challenges has actually opened up great opportunities for us to interact and collaborate even a lot more. So the challenges of today cannot be re-emphasized, as Telahun has mentioned. Please let us know who you are in the chat. Tell us where you're joining from. If possible, also tell us which component you are working on in reference to sustainable farming or regenerative agriculture or agroecology, and which parts of the country, which value chain we would like to learn a lot more about everybody on the call. So setting the scene, my name is Agi Konde. I am the Vice President of Program Innovation and Delivery at AGRA, Alliance for a Green Revolution. I and most of my colleagues and most of you on the call today are extremely passionate about solving for smallholder farmer challenges. And we believe that we have amassed enough knowledge across all our partners to be able to start applying different lenses to creating increased production profitably, sustainably, and in a resilient manner. So these are the conversations we will be having today. We all know the challenges that we face, but we all have lots of lessons that we have learned. And I would be keen on seeing some of the lessons that you have learned in your programs, in your interventions across the different countries for the teams represented here today. But to set the scene, we've got an eminent panel of experienced scientists, and this is going to be one of 3 series around what we are calling sustainable farming, transforming Africa's livelihood and landscapes. And to set the scene is we will be starting with the scientists. We want to know, what does the science say? And does the science resonate with what the smallholder farmers are looking for? Does the science resonate with what the policymakers are prioritizing? Does the science resonate with what the value chain actors are looking for us to be able to indeed build a resilient and sustainable ecosystem? So following the scientists web series, we will then be speaking to practitioners, we will be speaking to policymakers, we will be speaking to development actors again in the ecosystem, and we will close it out with private sector partners and other players that will be interested in this conversation. Ultimately, what is our last mile ambition? Our last mile ambition is to make sure we come out with a collaborative approach that works for Africa. And the questions that our panels will be discussing, is it a one-size-fits-all for the continent, or is it not? Are there solutions that we have seen that are scalable, that are profitable, and that are sustainable and resilient? So to set this scene, I would like to introduce none other than Dr. Telahun Ahmedi, who is the head of resilience, climate and soils at Alliance for Green Revolution. He needs no introduction because he is a very accomplished scientist that has worked on the continent. He's got a PhD in drought resistance mechanisms and management across, and also he's worked in various institutions with various academia. He's published lots of papers, and he will be setting the scene for us. He's been extremely instrumental in pulling all the opinions and comments from most of the scientists on this call. So allow me to introduce Dr. Telahun Ahmedi, who will be setting the scene for us for this conversation. Over to you, Ahmedi.
Yeah, thank you very much, Agi. Do you see my screen?
Yes, we do. If you can put it in full
screen. Is it full screen?
Yes, it is.
Great. Thank you very much, colleagues, and welcome again to this webinar. I'm going to introduce a few insights that have been emerging from Agra in the last few months, I would say. And I called my presentation Sustainable Farming for Transforming African Agriculture. To start with, the Vice President has talked about Agra. It's just to highlight what our vision is. We'd like to contribute to inclusive agriculture transformation, mainly reducing hunger, poverty, and improving wells, but also now improving the environment through empowering our farmers, but also facilitating stronger private sector and enhancing the capacity of our partner countries in our continent. And our approach is by supporting enablers, by identifying country portfolio and the uniqueness, and tailor our strategies to the country's needs. And for all that to happen, we work closely with multiple partners in the continent. Now, to my subject, why should we take sustainability in Agra seriously? Because there is an increasing demand from our target groups. And as you know, and it has been already mentioned in multiple forums, the continent is still where one-ton agriculture, low productivity, even after applying inputs, we are exposed to risk, mainly climate risk. We are also, producing in highly vulnerable systems. As you know, maize is a dominant crop in our continent. Besides that, because of the increasing population, there is a tendency to expand agriculture to protected areas, forests, wetlands, affecting the ecosystem services. And even in countries where there is relatively good yield, we cannot maintain them unless we invest on natural resource management. As you know, Agra has been working a lot in input delivery systems, reaching farmers, particularly with fertilizers and seeds. And yet, the return per investment is low because there are other drivers that are affecting yield, be it land degradation, be it drought, unpredictable weather, and other externalities. We have already worked in these countries with easy to use and relatively easy to move technologies of seeds and fertilizers, but now Agra understands that we have to move to more complex systems to make our agriculture more sustainable. Because natural resource management, but landscape management could play multiple roles for carbon sequestration, for improving productivity and profitability. And the timing is also good because we have tools now, from the research community. We have digital tools, we have farming system maps of Africa, we have apps for climate services, but also we have a latecomer advantage. There are some wrongs done, good experiences. Consider the greenwash in Asia, the organic agriculture in Latin America. There are a lot of really lessons across the globe where we can capitalize on. But also, I think most importantly is a global movement now, and a potential to get financing to address some of these constraints in the continent. Now, as the topic of the webinar called to address these multiple challenges, there are also multiple attempts and narratives that are coming up, mainly in Europe and North America. People have been for years talking about organic agriculture, which is largely now driven by consumer and global trade, operating at various scales. And in Latin America, as you know, there are strict standards and guidelines because people started to export their produces to European markets and so on. And then parallel, we have the agroecology concept, which is really emerging from the ecosystem forest landscape, which is really skeptical about inputs, usually promoting small holdings, promoting diversity, and promoting closed circular systems. But there's no still established standard or market levels. And then the very youngest one is, probably ours is the youngest, is regenerative agriculture, which is emerging really from groups with concerns from climate change, with core emphasis on soil health, again, critical about inputs, but advocates for replenishment of nutrients in depleted soils. Again, there's no established standard or marketing level. We have tried to review all these different concepts, and we started to pick the positive sides of all of this, and came up with our own narrative called sustainable farming, which should play complementary roles and multiple roles of improving productivity for us, because in Africa, food is still a big issue. Our productivity is still very low, and our farmers are still, are not profitable. So profitability is another big issue. But at the same time, we would like to address the climate and the market risk, so the resilience component of it. So you could see here really lists that brings us into this sustainable farming framework. And the key principles of sustainable farming in Sub-Saharan Africa for our really context is one, it's multifunctional, so really addressing the livelihoods at the same time also handling the environmental concerns. We feel that we need to go for at least for the continent a semi-circular system whereby there is an input flow and an output flow. We also are very much concerned about land degradation. So there's a very limited biomass in the system. Our carbon pools are very low. So we have to handle our landscapes. We feel that, one thing which makes us very, very different from other continents, the energy issue. As you know, because of lack of rural electrification, our people are relying on biomass for cooking. That's one reason for deforestation. Most of the nutrients that should have been returned to the soil are not going. So they rather go to the fire because people didn't have fuel for cooking, fuel for heat. So charcoal making is really making is a major driver of land degradation. We are called Sub-Saharan Africa, it's partly because of water. So water management, really mapping the water, storing the water, and efficiently utilizing both the rainwater and the surface water is becoming a big issue, a big component for us. As you know, climate change is a big issue. and we share all these concerns with the global community. And also, the inclusivity, particularly women and youth, because of very high, proportion of youth in the continent. We realize that, even the reversal of land degradation, restoration, climate change adaptation cannot be done by small farmers because the holdings are too tiny. So we need to mobilize communities, so mobilize collective action. And for all that, soil health plays a very important role, and judicious use of fertilizer in the continent. Yes.
Can you kindly put your presentation on screen, on full screen? I think some people are struggling to read.
Okay.
The registration. Yeah, please do.
I tried. Do you see it now in full screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. And we feel that critical inputs should come to the system because there has been centuries old mining of nutrients without returning the critical inputs to the soils and the systems, even in low input, low output agriculture. I think the other major challenge we face in the continent is really for farmers to access these inputs, but also to get the right content of extension. So the last mile delivery, particularly which really appreciates the variability and the system, is lacking. That's really where Agra has been also investing a lot for years. And then, of course, as you know, investments, so policy decisions are really critical. Just to give you a bit of insight from the literature, you could see here, Africa, people say have a lot of land, but the McKinsey synthesis shows that, if we want to feed Africa, most of the food has to come from yield improvement. So the land expansion, the post-harvest management can contribute, but most of the food should come from really sustainable intensification in the continent. And for that, of course, we need nutrients. I just wanted to display this slide from Wageningen University, which shows the nutrient pools, the phosphorus pool in this case, whereby, here in Western Europe, you could see a decline in the pool, but still the supply is much higher than the uptake. This is from North America. In Asia, a huge still pool and in an increasing trend. In Africa, you could see the application is very, very low, and the uptake is also very low because of our low yield. So we don't have any pool in the soil that we can rely on. The literature says some of these countries can rely on the soil pool up to 2050 without even losing yield. So that is, I think, very, very important for us. The other thing I mentioned about is the rehabilitation and the regreening of our landscapes. We'd like to recover millions of hectares under sustainable farming using already tested approaches. We have experiences in the Ethiopian highlands that you could see this work of mine, only in 5 years' time, you could change this landscape to this one. It's really taken the same season. And just 2 seasons, you could rehabilitate gullies to productive landscapes. So we have already experiences, including in Rwanda and in other places. I mentioned the energy, and just to give you a bit of taste, for example, Tanzania is losing about 500,000 hectares of forest per year because of charcoal production. Uganda loses about 2% of its forest. Kenya is losing about, and all this is because of lack of rural energy that people rely on biomass. Water, there are so many approaches tested in the continent, different sources, starting from the zai pits to water harvesting to diversion of floods, all sorts of things, but we don't see them used by farmers. These are only remaining in experimental fields. The farming system context, John Dixon, who is now in the panel, has written together with colleagues, including myself, stratifying Africa and dividing Africa into certain distinct farming systems, which can be used for targeting of options. You could see whatever happens in southern Mauritania or northern Senegal, the approach, the technology here can work here in northern Kenya or in Somalia without, really a major challenge, because up to now, really scaling is becoming an issue. So these technologies and practice that we have in the continent can be easily shared using some of these tools. We have even done one for Ethiopia, dividing the country into about 16 farming systems. So we know, if you have technology in one landscape, you know where, with a very high probability, where to take it next. The last mile delivery I talked about, we are working in the continent with localized and context-specific content, extension content, but also capacitating the extension agents and the village-based advisors to really take the inputs from the sources to the farmers without much loss and on time, while at the same time connecting the farmers to bigger markets. And the digital agriculture, as you know, is now becoming a big issue, and we're aligning with the CGR centers, including the excellence in agronomy, in using some of these tools into our sustainable farming approach in the continent. So this is the type of how to bring the pieces together. We know that sustainable farming is demanding a multi-dimensional partnership. So Agra is not going to do it all alone. So we have areas where we are going to have capacity, a competency, like here in the light color, but all the others are going to be done in partnership with research, with development, with NGOs, particularly with country programs and teams in the continent. So this is going to be a joint investment and enjoying engagement at a scale. So this is my last scale, Madam Chair. So really bringing the productivity, the profitability, and the resilience outcomes and impact requires investments in technology and innovation. We know that there's a lot out there in the shelf that we can really capitalize on. We need the right institutions to reach farmers, to reach policies and governments. We have to work on the policy issues, so we're working very closely with them. But also, this sustainable farming is different. It requires incentives. Some of the inputs and some of the investments are long-term, so farmers may not get the benefits in the first year or in the second year. So needs really investment and incentives to happen that, and we have tools and methods that we can capitalize on to make things happen. I thank you very much for your attention and stop here. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tilahun, for that very complex presentation that you've put forward. But I would like to recognize that we've got, the people on the call are from all walks of life. I am excited to see that we have people from North America, from Japan, from the UK, from the whole of Africa, all having these conversations and listening in today. So you have set the scene. And I think as I hand over to Ken, I will be challenging the panel to help us understand what this all means for a Wanjiku. Wanjiku in Kenya is typically the farmer, the smallholder farmer that we target. It's one thing understanding the science, but it's the other thing ensuring that that science makes sense for the smallholder farmer that we care for. So over the last years, this Wanjiku has been able to prove that they can indeed increase productivity. They've been able to increase their food supply from about 6 months a year to about 10 to 11, depending on the countries in which we are. They've been able to access some technologies. They've been able to access some knowledge. But as you've heard from Tilahun, it is a very heterogeneous landscape. It is complicated. The data sets are sitting in different places, and we now all need to come together with a multidimensional approach. So to moderate the session, is none other than our Professor Ken Gillard. I will quickly introduce him. He's got such a large CV, but he is a professor of plant production systems at Wageningen University. He leads a group of scientists with profound experience in applying systems analysis to explore future scenarios for land use with a focus on food production. And I'll now put probably food systems as well. Ken's research focuses on smallholder farming systems in sub-Saharan Africa, and in particular, problems of soil fertility and the role of nitrogen fixation in tropical regions. He gives emphasis on the temporal and spatial dynamics of resources within crop and livestock farming systems and their interactions. He is also the author of the standard text, Nitrogen Fixation in Tropical Cropping Systems, which was published in 2001. He is also the co-chair of the thematic Network 7 on sustainable agriculture and food systems of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network of the United Nations, and is also a member of the Unilever Sustainable Sourcing Advisory Board. Ken joined Wageningen University as chair of plant production systems in 2001 after holding professorships at Y College, University of London, and the University of Zimbabwe. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Ken Gillard to moderate this session and help answer these complex questions. Over to you, Ken.
Aggie, thanks very, very much for the introduction. I did actually provide a much shorter version of my CV than that, but anyway. I'm delighted to be here to discuss with you all today, and fantastic to see so many people on the call. I see we've got nearly 200, actually over 200 people now, and fantastic to see so much interest. Tilahun actually asked me yesterday if I'd chair this section. I think it's basically then I've got a clock here on my phone, and it's up to me to keep time and to keep our interventions hopefully fairly short from our panelists, so that then we can go into a broader discussion and answer questions. So we've got a very distinguished panel today, and on my list of the order of play actually will be firstly John Dixon. So John, can you open your camera so we can see you? So we'll be going in the order of John Dixon, then Sig Snap, then Ramajita, then Kwesi, and I have a few comments myself. So John, welcome. I've got a long CV for you here that I can read out as well if you want.
No.
But I think John Dixon's known to many of us, particularly for the role that he played actually in leading a lot of programs from ACIAR, and of course before that he was with CIMMYT. Very well known to us, particularly for his book on farming systems, and now I see an adjunct professor at University of Queensland. Could I ask other people like Michael to close their cameras actually, so that we only have the panelists in view? And John, over to you. I don't know if you have slides or if you're just going to share your thoughts with us. A maximum of 10 minutes, I think.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ken. Wonderful. Thanks for the intro. Great to see old friends on the screen and in the chat box. That's wonderful. Looking forward to the conversation. It's a very important conversation, looking to the future. I do have a couple of slides to put up, and I'd like to check that you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Would be the first thing.
Full screen. Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah, perfect. We can see it perfectly.
Excellent.
I'll give you a warning after 8 minutes, yeah?
Perfect, Ken. That'd be just great. So I like very much the way in which our Madam Chair, previous Chair, opening Chair, Vice President Agroecology set us up and talking about the relevance of this webinar, and then a very comprehensive overview by Tilahun, who really said it all, pretty much, I thought. And they've asked us to focus on 4 questions. An African model of sustainable farming, recognising diversity. Second, can we produce enough food and income what lessons could be learned from the Green Revolution in Asia, and what investments and policy options are required. So I'll take those questions one by one with just a few reflections, and apologies if I overlap in any sense with your comprehensive cover, Tilahun. The aspects that came to my mind in relation to your description and definition of sustainable farming is that it's a very suitable high-level narrative, and it resonates with many other narratives related to farming systems, to farmers, to the value chains, to policymakers, and food preferences and consumption. I note that there seem to be questions in relation to other popular narratives at the moment, such as, and you listed them in the title, such as agroecology, regenerative ag, organic ag, and so on and so forth. I think that we often focus very much on differences as the narratives are promoted for their great strengths. I'd like to make the point that there's more commonalities than differences across most of the high-level development narratives, and we forget that too often. And secondly, as Ken himself has said, there's often limited definition of local implementation approaches in diverse, local, complex, and uncertain realities. And so you could say they play out in different ways on the ground, and they also happen, in my observation, to play out remarkably similarly, regardless of the title of the narrative, when one gets down to successful activity on the ground. The couple of actions, one would be to articulate the operational principles and practices related to different major farming and food systems across Asia for sustainable farming. So we go from principles level down to implementation practices, whether we're in arid, semi-arid, subhumid, or high potential, well-marketed areas. Second, I'd just like to plug the possibilities and potentials of internalising the African farming and food systems to highlight differences in farming and strategic medium-term investments. It was very nicely put forward by Tilahun for extension and targeting. It also offers us many other opportunities in relation to coordination, sharing of knowledge, and spillovers, as I'll come to presently. It was already within the African science agenda from FARA. Question 2, the African population might triple by 2100, and I did underline might because there's an active discussion around the world at the moment that suggests that actually population growth might peak at 2040 and ultimately lead to a lower figure than we've been planning on for 2050 or 2100. That needs more analysis. Note that it's not just population. There's at least 6 other major drivers of agriculture and food, from natural resources, climate, knowledge systems, technology. So we need to integrate those with our thinking about population as we move towards thinking through food supply and food demand. And the key issue in my mind is not so much the food alone, but to boost the farm and non-farm rural incomes. That's the bigger challenge. So action would be to invest in more foresight analyses of population, food production and demand, nutritional and health implications as well, particularly in rural areas, differentiated across different parts of Africa. Question 3A, what can we learn from the Green Revolution in Asia? Well, major adaptations are needed for Africa. I think we all know that. We're in rain-fed farming, volatile climate, sparse infrastructure, and weaker institutions and markets, but huge complexity and uncertainty. And what we tend to forget that the Asian Green Revolution built on many decades of agricultural research results prior to 1960s. And it also took off in irrigated areas, that's different from Africa, and it had strong market and policy support, particularly in those areas. Again, that's a contrast to the situation in many areas of Africa. We also overlook what's happened since the 1960s with the Green Revolution, that South Asia in general and India in particular has travelled through complementary revolutions, white revolution, blue revolution, rainbow revolutions. You could imagine that's livestock and milk, fisheries and fruit and vegetables. So these are all building diversification and resilience whilst addressing those second generation problems of green revolution around natural resources, soils, water depletion, pest problems, etc. So the action that's missing, as I see it in Africa, is to boost investment in agricultural research and institutions and infrastructure with a strong focus on diversification and resilience. We recognise and know that ag research intensities in Africa are running at about 0.3% plus or minus of gross agricultural domestic product. And the general recommended level of 1% requires massive investment, and that ag research is one of the best investments that public money can make in relation to food supply and income. Also, to strengthen the participatory research and planning with farmers, we often look down from policy and science levels rather than understanding the details and diversity of farmers' needs and aspirations and how we can bring science to meet their needs. That's tied up, by the way, with the massive importance of the scaling challenge, as mentioned by our Vice President. 3 actions to wrap up. I think that we need to build capacity for research, for scaling, for extension in private sector, and that it goes beyond simply research, but also in development capacities. We need to invest also in the management of spillover of research and technologies and innovation, but also development experience, because so many of the failures are actually not research failures, but they are development implementation failures. Second, we've got to mainstream 6 Eyes. I'd be very happy with the 5 Eyes that Telehun put up. Very, very good and very excellent, but they've got to be mainstreamed and internalised into actions, planning and investment. Finally, promote resilience and diversification. I fear that even as we come out of COVID, the lessons, we're not paying nearly enough attention to the importance of investing in resilience at all levels, particularly from the farm system, farm household level, up through chains, local institutions to national and regional institutions. And we have to double our efforts in diversification. That's another lesson out of Asia. And that's the way we will boost income as well as nutritional food supply. So thank you very much. Looking forward very much to the conversation.
John, that was brilliant. Thanks very much. You're well within your 10 minutes. I think I got you clocked at 9 there roughly. So thanks very much for that and for addressing these 4 questions that Telehun put to us. Just for the participants, please do put your questions in the question and answer. That'll be the one that we'll be able to monitor. By all means, carry on putting comments in the chat if you want, but it'll be the question and answer box that we'll be able to look at. I'd like now to hand over the floor then to Sig. I see you've got slides and you're ready to go. So sorry, I need to now give you a formal introduction. I'm not official enough, am I? So Sigsnat, very well known to us all, I think, Professor of Agricultural Systems Ecology at Michigan State University, been very active in sustainable agriculture, particularly soil science in Africa, particularly in Southern Africa, Malawi, but also in other parts of the continent. And more recently, together with the Africa Rising team, has been very active, looking particularly around sustainable intensification, I think, as it was framed. Sig, over to you for your 10 minutes, and I'll give you a warning. I'll come back on after 8. Over to you.
Thank you. I just, on a personal note, want to say thanks so much. I learned as a postdoc back in the day, Ken Gillard was one of the mentors that in the Soil Net, for those who remember, we had the opportunity to travel and learn from farmers. And also Ken Gillard would ask questions of the farmers as if he's never met a farmer before. So it was always a privilege being in the field with him. And I'm just so honored to be in this group here. And in fact, all of you, the 205, I think we're all about reducing hunger, improving resilience for farmers as they face, unprecedented climate emergency with dry spells, with intensive rain events, even more than in the past in Africa. Market value chains that sometimes don't function well, sometimes are new opportunities. So as we think about how we can support farmers and communities, sustainable agriculture has always been at the forefront for me, because I think that is indeed, as we heard from Tillahan, one of our opportunities. How do we support a greener revolution? I just want to give a shout out to African countries and their commitment from Abuja days to support fertilizer access. That's very much occurred in certain intensification corridors in Africa. Certainly Malawi is an example where I've privileged to work since 1993. So farmers often can access 1 or 2 bags of fertilizer now, but then how do they invest that? And what other investments do they need in order to be able to use it effectively? I think these are some of the questions about a greener revolution. I think soil health is a big part of that. And that indeed is what I'm going to talk a bit about. And instead of endless arguments about, is it conservation agriculture? Is it regenerative agriculture? I think many of us would agree that we need to focus on outcomes. I was honored to lead an agroecology systematic review recently for DFID and others. And one of the things that came out of it, we think, is that there's pretty universal agreement that we need to be outcome oriented. What does that actually mean? Well, if soil carbon or soil organic matter improvements are needed, whether you're getting them through small investments in, say, part of your garden is conservation agriculture, part of it maybe is part of your farm is organic, maybe part of it is really you're part of an agroecology community within your village, then have you been effective at improving soil organic matter in your farm, in your village? So whichever community you're part of, or whichever options you're promoting with farmers or policymakers, whatever you're trying to see invested in, I think most would agree that having the ability to measure soil organic matter on their farm is one of the ways that both shows how to improve greenhouse gas mitigation, because soil carbon is an important sink for carbon. Also, how to improve soil moisture regulation. As I said, more dry spells, more erratic, intense rainfall events, those can be buffered by diverse crops, by soil organic matter. And diversity, we're finding more and more. There's seminal work showing intercrops and mixed cropping, different, not just perennials, but bushes and shrubs. They all improve soil carbon, even weeds in their place. And conservation type principles, such as improving land cover. But how to actually do that on farm in a profitable, practical way? Well, if farmers and extension advisors, whether from NGOs or from government, if extension can take a smartphone app such as LambPKS or a reflectometer such as shown here, sensors, proximal sensors, and show the farmer, yes, you've improved your soil carbon. Or no, you really are, this field is much lower than the other fields. That is what I call outcome oriented. So instead of arguing about what worked where, we're trying to help farmers fine tune, communities decide which types of conservation they need to implement. So this is a form of digital ag, but it is participatory, farmer-centric, and I think that's really critical, whether you're talking market data, whether you're trying to improve seed systems. And I do think we need to broaden the genetic options. We've been good at getting fertilizers to farmers and improving genetics, but sometimes we've just giving them drought tolerant, which sounds great, but sometimes that means early maturing. What's wrong with early maturing? Nothing. But what if we also need some long duration crops, so diversifying crop options? Now that's often seen as a principle of both conservation ag and agroecology. So I'm not into labels again. Let's just broaden options, improvability to locally determine whether they've been effective or not at delivering a green revolution at these local levels, as well as then extracting as scientists. We're not just doing participatory of particular villages. No, I think we're trying to now deliver, whether it's through digital ag, through voice activated advice, participatory informal seed systems, all these different ways we deliver advice, but we think we need to do more synthesis too. See what works where, so that, again, move beyond labels, provide options, and then see what works where. I think we're at what Ken Gillard has called a golden age of agronomy, and he's worried I think, if I recall, that maybe it's past us. But in fact, I think we're about ready to try again, but with a more farmer-centric approach that can be empowered through some of these digital tools and some of the big efforts around soil health, which to me are particularly exciting because, yes, we've achieved greater fertilizer intensification, but we're also seeing worrying signs of soil degradation. So how do we move back into soil health? So when we intensify, we don't just produce lots of cereals, because maize after maize after maize is very important for food security, but not for food nutrition, right? We need to have the legumes there. I think most would agree. We need to have diversified livelihood options, whether it's fish farming, whether it's trying to make sure that there's enough of a cash crop options, and legumes, which of course I always come back to, because I don't feel we yet have enough options. So if we have pigeon pea, you knew I was going to bring up pigeon pea. Those of you who know me, multi-purpose crops, shrubs like pigeon pea that also produce food, vines like cowpea, viney cowpeas for drier areas, for wetter areas, things like lima beans. So we have legumes because they build that soil carbon and nitrogen pools. And sometimes it's underappreciated that fertilizers provide a lot of nitrogen, but to make phosphorus efficient from fertilizers and nitrogen efficient, legumes are proven in their ability to fix nitrogen, but also to access sparingly soluble phosphorus and to build organic matter. Three things that we really need. But that's just my hypothesis. Let's prove it or disprove it for certain soil types. And how can we do that? We come back to digital ag, right? So we can use handheld, such as you're seeing here, soil health, farmers' indigenous knowledge of soil health, but then complemented with these handheld devices to see what works where. That is one of the most exciting new innovations around farmer-centric opportunities. So I think starting to get the go, let's, yeah, okay, so we have a couple more minutes here.
Yeah, a couple of minutes, Sue.
Yeah, all right. So I just want to reiterate that whether we're talking agroecology or conservation agriculture, there is commitments to crop diversity. So a number of meta-analysis recently. So these are analyses of analyses. So thousands of data points showing us on farm that crop diversity provides all these benefits. Improves soil health, improves beneficials, nutrition, human nutrition, livelihood options. And yet, what's happening in the world? Much of the Green Revolution is about narrowing, fewer cereals, fewer varieties. So we want to give farmers the best options, but I think we've overlooked that maybe we need to have policies that promote diversification more, combined with these soil health assessment approaches and market information. So with these three tools, broader seed systems, more options for seeds, and digital agriculture, as long as we're farmer-centric, I think we're on our way. So if not now, then when? Let's improve, move beyond labels and be outcome-oriented in ecological intensification. Thank you.
Thanks, Sig. That's a great conclusion. And there's some interesting comments flipping by in the chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on those at the same time. So keep them coming, keep the debate coming. I'd like to move on now, though, with our next panelist. So this is Dr. Ramajita Tabo. So Ramajita, can you open up your camera? And I'm not sure if do you have some slides you'd like to share?
I divided my thing into two very few words and also a few slides at the end. So I will start with some discussion first.
Okay.
But
anyway, just to introduce you first of all, I
yes.
have to introduce you.
Okay.
So systems agronomist, PhD in genetics from plant genetics from University of Arizona, currently regional director for ICRISAT in Western Central Africa, based in Bamako, where we still collaborate. And before deputy exec director of FARA, based in Accra. So I think we're very well known to many of us. Over to you, Ramajita. Looking forward to your comments.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ken. And as I said earlier, it's nice to see you and Sig and others. Our good friend Tilahun has really summarized a lot of what we're going to say. So we will seek for the indulgence of the participant if we repeat ourselves, but repetition is still good as long as we are saying things that make sense. What Tilahun asked me to do is to focus on one of the 4 questions. And I saw that John Dixon covered all 4 of them, but I think even in doing so, I'm going to cover some of those other questions, but I focus on, can we produce enough food and income for the current and growing population of Africa without using critical external inputs? First, I don't think that we can really grow enough food without using external inputs. We need to be judicious in our use of external inputs, not overuse it. And that's why we try to develop technologies that can help us to use minimal quantity of inputs so that we can preserve the environment, which will reduce or prevent soil degradation. So technologies like microdosing and others. But first, maybe let me also share with you what probably most of you know, but what do we mean by sustainable intensification? Sustainable intensification is about producing more food, more outputs with more efficient use of all inputs. And on a durable basis, that's very important because you don't want to go into produce 6 tons per hectare of maize or sorghum this season, and next season you go down to 0 tons. So you need to have a durable, sustainable production of those food while reducing environmental damage and building resilience. That again is quite important because a lot of focus now is being put on resilience. How do we get the farmers to adapt or cope with the external events like flooding and drought and things like that. So resilience is quite important. And we also need to make sure that we build also the natural capital and the flow of environmental services. So sustainable intensification is really about conserving our natural landscape, not only because of the ecosystem services they provide, but also the present and future cultural value. So you can produce, increase productivity, but keep in mind that you want to conserve that biodiversity or the soil for future use. So the aim is really to have a smaller environmental footprint by minimizing the use of fertilizer and pesticide, while generating lower emission of such greenhouse gases as carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, and at the same time, contributing to the delivery and maintenance of a range of public goods, such as clean water, carbon sequestration, flood protection, groundwater recharge, and landscape amenity value. So to attain really those objectives, we need to focus on being prudent. So the whole issue is that we should take the context in which we're operating. Where are we operating? Are we operating in a very fragile environment, like in the Sahel here in West Africa, where the soil is already degraded? So if you are working on that thing or working with the farmers, you have to be prudent and in the use of inputs, particularly those that are scarce and very expensive. As you know, the price of fertilizer is important. We need to be efficient in seeking returns and in reducing waste and necessary use of scarce inorganic and natural inputs. Resilient, as I said earlier, to future shocks, and equitable in that the inputs and outputs of intensification are accessible and affordable, because the poor farmer of the semi-arid tropics of the dry land of Africa cannot afford inputs, whether it's seed, whether it's fertilizer. So that has to be taken into account. Then the intensification process, there are three things that I want to mention here is that you have the ecological intensification, which is, I think Tilahun has showed good example of that: intercropping, integrated pest management, conservation farming, organic farming. All these come into what we call the ecological intensification. The second process is the genetic intensification. Our breeders develop now high nutrient dense varieties that are high yielding, but they should also have some nutritive values and resistant to pests and diseases, because with climate change, there is now occurrence of new diseases and pests. So we need to take that into account. Resilient to climate change, creating sustainable livelihood. Then the third aspect is the socio-economic intensification, where we need to create that enabling environment, because even if we go with microdosing, we said you need only 20 kg of fertilizer, the price of that fertilizer should be affordable to the farmer. So we need some kind of policy that would enable prices to go down for farmers to use that. And then we need to link the farmers to the market. It's not only about producing surplus, but how do they get access to market so that they can sell also the product. So those are the kind of the principles I want to say, but Ken Gillard, I will now go quickly and show just maybe, I think I use 5 minutes. Give me some idea. So let me.
I make it about 7 minutes you've had so far. So that bit like.
Okay, no problem. I will. So let me see here. I'll just show maybe.
Sorry, I was wrong. It was 5 minutes you've had, because I'm timing 8. So you have 5.
That's what I thought. Okay. I will then quickly just show you some things to put now picture into the words of what I've been talking about, the intercropping and the whole issue of things. So I'm going to show a few slides quickly. Let me put it on, what do you call it? Okay. So the term agroecology, I think as we see it there, I mentioned the issue of the principle is about this diversification of production system, looking at the issue of resilience. You see the kind of environment in which we are working on the left side, very degraded land that is not covered by vegetation at all. Then the alternatives really of production is what we need to design solutions that are context specific in some cases and have a basket of options. And I think Ken Gillard, I like the article that he sent to us, this basket of options that will be addressing the specific issues of each environment that in which we're working. We have to look at the issue of also crop livestock integration, improving small ruminant. When we talk of soil fertility enhancement, there's not only the chemical fertilizer, we're talking about how do you get also the organic matter, and that comes from livestock. How do you get the nutrient cycling done so that you can keep the organic content of your soils? The issue of linking farmer to producers is very important. You can see here, I think I talked about the microdosing, using very small doses of fertilizer right in the roots of the plant so that you can increase yield, and we can get up to 50% more yield than really using 100 kg, for example, of NPK. You can only use 20 kg of DAP by targeting your crop with small amounts of fertilizer. It's called precision farming. It's like the drip irrigation that people use in African market garden. So the alternative is soil water conservation. I think Tilahun talked about that. We should look at it not only on the plot basis, but also at the watershed level. How do we collect all this excess water when there's excess water so that it can be reused again? All this will contribute to sustainable farming. And the achievement and impacts of some of the work we have done is counterbanding, again, for water collection. And we have shown that the counterbanding technique that we use in dry land of West Africa can give you 20% higher yield or more so if you use it properly. Then the issue of getting also legumes, I think Sig talked about it. I am also in favor of getting intensified the density of our legume into the cereal crop so that you can get more yield. You can see right there, the field on the right side is under crop contour banding, but the one on the left side has a lot of erosion that has occurred. You can see also, again, some alternative of water management practices using solar energy now, which is becoming really very important. Yes, here we're talking about machinery, post-harvest losses. I think we need to get also mechanization going with women that can help them to thresh their crops better and have quality products. We can also, in IPM, use of biological pests to, to reduce the issue of armyworm. Our colleague in Nyami is working a lot on that, using biological control of pests so that you don't have to spray so many insecticide. And we're now having what we call now the smart food campaign. Sorghum and millet, as you know, a lot of you want to eat maize and rice, which gives you a lot of diabetes. I'm not saying that you should not eat them, but sorghum and millet are better because it has a lot of iron and zinc. And for lactating mothers and for small children, you can get really good food. So we're trying to push sorghum and millet, and I'm very happy to, pleased to inform you that 2023 has been declared by the United Nations as the International Year of Millets. So agribusiness is another area that we need to get the youth interested in agriculture, get digital agriculture, telephone, using conservation agriculture, using also climate information services, getting the weather forecasting and weather in the hand of farmer. So Ken, with that, I will stop here and then.
Thanks very much, Ramajita. Great that you actually gave us there some really good examples as well of locally appropriate technologies, and as well focusing very much on the drylands. As a man of the savannah you are. I'd like to move now to our final panelist, and that's Dr. Kwesi Atakra. So Kwesi, I think you're there now. I don't know if you have slides you'd like to share. Yeah, if you could close yours, Ramajita. Kwesi, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ken. It's really nice to see you and to see John and all the others that I haven't seen.
I have to give you an introduction first, Kwesi.
Oh, okay.
Can I do that? Anyway, you're Director Country Regional Engagement at ITA in Ibadan, Nigeria. I think many of people know Kwesi very much from the time of the humid tropics, CRP particularly. And he's now Senior Program Engagement Specialist with the TAT, the Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation Program of the African Development Bank. But I think very well known to many of us. Over to you, Kwesi.
Thank you, Ken. And first of all, let me also thank AGRA for organizing this event. I think it's very appropriate. And historically, personally, for me, I've been very much engaged in systems research, beginning with the farming systems concepts in the late 70s, early 80s, moving into, I ran this, what was seen then as a way of minimizing fertilizer by enhancing the use of organic material. This is the early farming concept. I was very key in that system. I then moved on to be more interested in looking at integrated systems approaches. This is what led me to the humid tropics program. And of recent, I've been involved and associated with various initiatives addressing issues of agroecology and other sustainable systems approaches. So the subject matter for this is something that is of great interest to me. I am informed that as a panelist, we all need to be able to comment on how could we employ an African model of sustainable farming. And that's what I want to share my thoughts on. And I don't have any PowerPoint slides, so I hope you can just enjoy the way I speak these things. I see that in looking at what AGRA has described as the model for sustainable farming, it recognizes diversity of farming systems. It recognizes agroecology, resources, food habits, and other external drivers. I see specific reference on this issue of agroecology in this context. The challenge with agroecology, as I have seen it, is that it's become a political issue. It's just like COVID vaccination. You get people who are so, much against and so much pro. But also agroecology has a number of different dimensions and multiple characteristics. And sometimes particular groups just highlight one or two key elements and they want to go on that and just basically forget. I just want to remind you that the FAO did a very interesting work on agroecology, and at the end of it, they identified these 10 elements or characteristics of agroecological systems. And these are very, very interesting elements. I don't need to, I'm sure you all are familiar with it. But the interesting dimension is that these elements are supposed to be interlinked and interdependent. So they're not just independent elements. And it's important for us in defining the need for these sustainable farming systems that we're talking about. The reality of the challenge we are in at the moment, talking about African agriculture, is that we are impacted by many of the global challenges that humanity faces. And some of these have been listed. It is commonly accepted, therefore, that there is a need for a radical realignment of agricultural food systems so that we can alleviate these challenges and also ensure that we are not just producing enough food, but we are also contributing to other areas such as job creation, especially for youth, prosperous livelihoods, and economic development as a whole. So the challenge for agriculture is quite heavy. However, the approach we take for addressing this challenge for agriculture needs to be context specific. It is not a one size fits all, where we think we have one system and it's going to be practiced in all ecologies and geopolitical zones. If we look at the specific case of Africa, there are a number of key things I'd like to highlight. It is common knowledge that agriculture is really the foundation of a lot of things we do in Africa, including contributions to economic development. It is also true that the agriculture in Africa is extremely diverse, and it is diverse across so many different elements. Traditionally also, agriculture has been a smallholder production activity built around subsistence mindset and culture. I recall growing up as a little boy, joining my grandmother every Saturday to go to the farm in those early years. And you go to the farm and basically it's to be able to get a few crops of yam and cassava, you bring it home and you consume, you sell a little bit. Today, the agriculture space has evolved beyond that. It has evolved to new levels. First of all, the number of mouths that agriculture has to feed is now quadrupled, and therefore more food has to be produced. Plus the fact that the land issue is also key. A lot of us make reference to the fact that 60% of cultivable land in the world is in Africa. And sometimes we can just, think because of that we don't have land challenges, but we do, because we don't want to clear all our forests growing more food. In this respect, one needs to be conversant with the realities and challenges facing African agricultural systems. Let me highlight a few of the key issues. One key reality is the case of low use of agro inputs. This primarily touches on fertilizer use, as well as agrochemical use, pesticides, insecticides, etc. For instance, in the case of fertilizer, we're told that an average African farmer uses less than 20 kilograms per hectare of fertilizer, when in some parts of the world, they're using over 200 kilograms per hectare of fertilizer. Also in Africa, there is a problem with access to improved high quality seed with adaptation for climate smartness, and where nutrition is also built into it. So any agricultural system, I must say, that thrives on avoiding the use of mineral fertilizer and agrochemicals may work in a few limited situations, but cannot be the fundamental system for widespread agricultural practice in the continent. Based on lessons from the Asian Green Revolution, we all know that it is clear that we need to be careful not to get to the point of creating environmental pollution through excessive use of these resources. However, Africa is far from that level of resource use. It's very far from that level of resource use. So for me, the challenge in Africa is really about increasing the use of these resources, but doing it in such a way that environmental consciousness, sustainability considerations, efficiencies in use of these external resources are taken into account. In that regard, the principles of agroecology proposed by FAO and also by the Committee on World Food Security, the high-level panel of experts in 2019, I find them to be very useful. Let me read for you the way the high-level panel of experts defined agroecology. And they said agroecology is increasingly promoted as being able to contribute to transforming food systems by applying agroecological principles. And I want to re-emphasize the issue of the principles to agriculture and ensuring regenerative use of natural resources and ecosystems, while also addressing the need for socially equitable food systems, etc. So I am aware that some proponents of agroecology go to the extreme in their characterization of what the system entails. There is a school of thought which basically even says that you cannot use fertilizer if you are doing agroecology. You know, that they basically link it to use of pure organic materials, and agro inputs have to be avoided. I cannot see a system like that being suitable or possible across Africa. It could be very well useful in some particular niche scenarios, and it has to be promoted. I'm not saying it's not possible. There are possibilities where you have the organic matter, you have the necessary environment, and you can use it to produce some niche crops, but that should not be. Now I know my time is gone, so let me go to the conclusion. In conclusion, I want to conclude by expressing appreciation for the concept of sustainable farming advocated by AGRA as a way of aggregating the multiple environment conscious approaches being floated. I strongly believe that between the two positions of either being strongly pro-agroecology or strongly anti-agroecology, there is a healthy middle. And this healthy middle must be the basis upon which sustainable farming is developed. And I see a combination between agroecological principles and sustainable intensification in this dimension. Finally, I just want to highlight a few key things that I think should be part of the sustainable farming for Africa moving forward. Improved seed is key. Efficiency in use of agro inputs is key. Entrepreneurship and business mindset is key. Youth and women engagement, social and cultural considerations, and finally, policy for establishing the enabling environment that is required. Ken, thank you. I think I must have spent 1 or 2 minutes extra.
No, I think that was just about the 10 minutes, Kwesi. So okay. Thanks very much indeed. And I think that you were very eloquent. I think you put that together very well indeed. So I was actually asked to give my own thoughts. So I'll put my timer on again, and I'll try and do it well within the time allowed. But I'd just like to share a few thoughts from my side. And I think part of what I'd say will, in sense, be a summary of what some of the other speakers have already provided in their interventions. So if we go back to the start of AGRA, and I was involved together with Ben Van Lau, who's on the call, and others in helping to write the soil health program documents at the very initiation of AGRA. Kofi Annan called for this uniquely African green revolution, which recognized this huge diversity of African farming systems, of cultures, of continents, of agroecologies across the continent. I think that's something we really need to keep in mind, embracing this huge diversity. Now, some people think I'm against things, but I wouldn't absolutely say I'm against anything. I'm an agnostic. I want to see good progress, and I think we should really be embracing of all possible technologies that are available for farmers. I'm concerned when we talk about some of the debate around regenerative agriculture that it's something of a helicopter science being plummeted in from outside the continent of Africa. And I think it's really important that debates like this come actually with a very strong African representation to actually decide in the continent what's appropriate for farmers in people's own countries. So Kwesi already referred to these 10 principles from FAO and the 13 principles of the high-level panel of experts on agroecology. And I think we can go along with nearly all of them. They're very sensible. I've got them here in front of me now. Except for me, the one where I really do have problems is a principle of input reduction. And Kwesi framed this very well, that if we're actually at rock bottom in terms of soil fertility, how can we reduce inputs? I think one point I'd like to make here is we need to differentiate between nutrients, because nutrients, in essence, are environmentally benign if they're used in the right quantities, and pesticides, which are designed to kill things. And of course, we need them at times, potentially in pest outbreaks, such as the locust outbreaks or whatever. Maybe we need to use them at times, but we have to remember that they're very different from nutrients. And why do we pile it all into one basket? So on this point, I think the starting point is absolutely key. I live in the Netherlands. We've got too many livestock. The place is flooded with nutrients. We have to reduce the amount of nutrients sloshing around in the environment, no question. But in most of the places I've worked in Africa, soil fertility, poor soil fertility is a binding constraint to production, and we need to increase inputs. I spent my whole career working on soil biology, on nitrogen fixation, and yeah, we can do a lot using biological methods, but we can't invent phosphorus and potassium out of the air. And eventually, even fixing nitrogen through legumes doesn't really give us the productivity need. So I do believe that we need to have inputs from fertilizers. And I see there's a debate and a discussion going on in the chat. Keep it coming, because there's clearly people who disagree with that. Apart from this point of starting points, I think we also need to think about these broader ecological footprints. You know, in Europe, they're talking now about reducing production. And well, that's fine, but that does mean with a growing population, what does that mean actually for land clearance in other parts of the world? And I think if we're going to have more lower input systems in places like Europe, we need to think very much about what implications does that have more broadly across the continent. And just one last point on some of the claims for regenerative agriculture. There have been claims have made that we can solve all of the problems of global warming simply by locking up carbon in soils. And some of these claims are real claims which give us a huge credibility problem, because I think they're overplaying the benefits there. So from my side, I'd say, I think the principles of agroecology have got to offer, but I go very much along the lines of Kwesi's actually intervention, suggesting that we need to find this middle ground where we're not trying to ban and reduce the potential for farmers to get access to what they'd like. A last point from me, and I see Tilahunn's already there on the screen. If we look at this comparison with Asia and the Asian Green Revolution, there have been a huge interventions in Asia in terms of policy at national level, right down to local level, in terms of subsidies, in terms of investment in infrastructure, investment in social security systems, safety nets, right down to the very basic local level. So multi-layered policy interventions to support smallholder farming. And even then, we end up in a situation where many smallholder farmers actually struggle to build a livelihood and actually remain well below the poverty line. And there's a great book I've got here of Henley, the Asian African Development Divergence, which goes into this in detail. And I'd really recommend it if people would like to understand more about that, because I think the importance of the policy intervention, and that's really thinking about African governments and the role that AGRA has actually to advocate investment, as we've heard, in agricultural research, but also investment in rural areas and in the infrastructure needed for smallholder production, I think is absolutely key. So I just took 6 minutes and I'll stop at that point. And I think at this point, I'm due to hand back to Aggie, who's going to chair the discussion. So back over to you, Aggie.
Thank you very much, Ken. And I think the discussion was extremely rich with lots of comments coming through, but also with the audience broadly agreeing, but also bringing out some alternative views that really such conversations seek to bring out. So I think the next part of the conversation is going to be, we have tried to frame most of the comments that have come through on the chat. We are going to pick out the first three, and we will be calling upon a couple of our other panelists who will be speaking to some of those questions because they actually do speak to some of their work. I will be introducing Professor Christobnas Daudi, Dr. Susan Chomba, Dr. Michael Misiko, and we've got a representative from ROPA, that is Mohamed Odrago, for the 4 questions that I will be framing. Most of these questions are a synthesis of the comments that we are seeing in the chat, but they will be sharing with us their experiences. As we mentioned earlier, this is a dialogue for solutions. We are not looking at this as, you know, a critique, a negative space where we don't find solutions for Africa. The need for solving for hunger in a sustainable manner is here with us today. It's not going to go away until we bring solutions that can work. So starting off that conversation and picking from the 6 C's that Dr. John Dixon spoke to, I would like to invite Professor Christobnas K. Daudi, who's from the National Agriculture Extension Research and Liaison Services in Nigeria. He brings a lot of experience on extension and sustainability. He's an expert in that area in Africa. He's been working a lot in building sustainable and resilient systems for smallholder farmers. And in recent times, he's been providing technical leadership on the integration of climate information systems into smallholder production capacities and investments across the continent for last mile. So Professor Christobnas, if you can please put your camera on. The question that has come through is that using the lens of the 2 I's, which is innovation and information, we have seen in some places low adoption of technologies, while in some places we've seen high adoption of technologies. From your experience, what practices, what successful practices can you share with us that the continent can amplify or can borrow from your own expertise, and what constraints remain to ensure that we have higher adoption of technologies for smallholder farmers within the sustainable farming thinking? Thank you.
I'm actually on a webinar in Africa. It's okay.
Good afternoon
or good evening all.
If they call my name,
Professor Ken, would you like to mute?
It's 200 people and I was chairing the session just now.
Okay,
what's your name?
Ken, we hear you, we hear you.
Ken, we can hear you. You probably want to mute your screen, yeah. Okay, over to you, Professor Chris.
Good afternoon or good evening all. Privileged to meet with experts from across the continent and the world. Yes, smallholder farmers has been on the table for long, but small farmers have not yet come onto the table. Yes, we are adding a 3rd issue to the challenges the farmers face: low productivity, low income, now low resilience. And what has actually limited the farmer from advancing on all these issues is that he lacks what I would call advisory services. For some time back, you would have found that Nigeria and Africa appeared to be going towards the Green Revolution. because there was support for what we call public extension-driven system. And the support was mainly externally to those countries. Using Nigeria as a typical example, we had the World Bank support up to the mid-80s, where even at the recommended rate, an extension agent was supposed to be speaking to maybe one extension is speaking to between 300 to 500 farmers. Even at the peak of when extension was good, we had that extension agent speaking to 800 to 1,000 farmers. Now, with the collapse of funding from the public sector, across Nigeria, probably most of Sub-Saharan West or Sub-Saharan Africa, you'll find that the grassroots extension has virtually collapsed. In Nigeria, in many places, you have what you call an extension agent speaking to close to, of course, we lack data, 10, 20 or more thousand farmers or farm families. So now, tying it to this, we are bringing on the table, the farmer needs to improve his productivity, he needs to improve his income, and now he needs to adopt what we call best bet resilience enhancing management practices. Some of these practices may or may not be new to the farmer, but he needs to be able to understand and to be able to adopt them. So most of what for me is, I agree that you have some of these technologies. What do we need to do to catalyze or to move the farmers to be able to adopt that? One, you need somebody on the ground to be able to advise. That can no longer happen in terms of population. So it is very unlikely that any country, including Nigeria, will be able to bring to fore the necessary extension persons to do that. So we must begin to look at how do we integrate public extension with private extension, and then move from maybe, now we're no longer talking ICT for agri, we're talking of digital agri. One or two of the panelists try to talk about digital options. So for us too, you have this good well, best bet or resilience enhancing technologies, but the farmer is not on the table to make that choice. So we need the farmer, we need people who also understand the farmer to help him to take that choice. For years, we have been talking farmer first. We have been talking of putting the farmer on the driving seat. But where we are going now, we need to be able to co-pilot the farmer to take advantages of these options. I'll give an example. We talk about insurance. In Nigeria, we have insurance and farmers are told to insure. At the time of payment, the insurance company now says that most of the flooding that happens in Nigeria is due to dams being opened in neighboring countries. And the insurance company now says that it is not a natural incident, it was a deliberate incident. But from beginning, most of these companies knew about this. So you need to work with the farmer that knowing he's taking insurance, he has to impute such known occurrences into the insurance he's taking. This is just an extreme case. But in Nigeria, with some support from donors, including AGRA, we have tried to look at what options are there to strengthen what we call grassroots extension. The extension system has collapsed, but the critical interface is that phase where the farmer is talking or picking up advisory services. And that is, for me, in my personal opinion, is what we call the rate limiting step. One option is, are there public-private options that can enable the private sector to provide those necessary advisory services while the public sector will provide some direction or overall. So for us, yes, it's good that we are talking of different best bet practices, different best bet options, but you need a catalyst to drive that step forward. You need a sustainable and practicable extension in place. I don't know how much time I have, but what do we need in terms of extension? You need a private sector driven extension. You need an ICT or digital enabled extension. Because without this, all you have is technologies being in place. Some of them the farmer knows, some of them the farmer doesn't know, but the farmer needs to understand it and contextualize it. So also in terms of one cap fits all, it is very unlikely that we can have a one cap fit all, both in terms of your best bet practices or both in best or in terms of the necessary extension prices. But the fact that we need a grassroots enabled extension combining practices of public and private sector driven, it's what is critical. So of course you will now be having some results of successes in fertilizer use, successes in weed or herbicide use. Those are things for the farmers can readily see the output. But for most of the times, when you're talking of climate or other resilience issues, the immediate benefits or the immediate impact may not be visible to the farmer. So it means you will need a stronger role of extension to address this. Do I still have 1 or 2 minutes? Oh.
1 minute, Professor.
Okay. 1 minute, Professor. If there's only one thing I want us to go out with. Yes, thank you very much for all the technologies you are bringing up. They are very useful, they are very necessary. But unless we're able to integrate and have a strong means of communicating these new technologies, the methods in which are going to move to the farmer. So it's as equally important in generating technologies. It's also equally important to ensure that appropriate means of communicating and adapting those resilience and enhancing technologies are available to smallholder farmers. Thank you. I'm looking forward to this group and bringing up strong options to Africa, feeding Africa and feeding the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Chris. And I think I cannot agree with you more, because that does resonate to the opportunities that are available. And probably some of these ideas we would probably need to scale up to the Food System Summit as the big ideas that need to be scaled on the continent. And what I hear you saying is integration of public-private extension services. And again, speaking to some of the comments in the chat, I'm seeing the language should be in local languages, it should be diverse, so many people are kind of agreeing with you that the extension system is broken, but we can only repair it with a public-private sector approach. Thank you very much, Prof. So quickly moving to Dr. Susan Chombi, who's the Director of Virtual Landscapes, Africa World Resources Institute, and our partner tonight as well. She leads the Institute's work on forests, food systems, and people, which includes forest landscape restoration,